welcome to Brand Equity with me, Sonali Krishna. We're living in dark times, and as India battles its biggest humanitarian crisis since partition, the light at the end of this very dark tunnel seems a while away. I'd like to begin this show by first offering our heartfelt condolences to families who have lost their loved ones and strength to those who are battling this wretched virus. This is also a very dark time for the economy at large, as several sectors lie battered and lifeless. The overall investment sector is also adversely impacted. While businesses across all sectors can sense the repercussions, startups have been particularly most vulnerable, and in fact are facing various formidable challenges, both from a business as well as from an operations perspective. Most startups have witnessed a decline in supply and demand, except for those startups that are engaged in the supply and delivery of essential services, educational technology, gaming, or streaming services. I'm joined today by some of India's top VCs to discuss the current state of affairs when we talk of the startup ecosystem, challenges in front and ahead of the sector, and how the sector is striving continuously to adapt to the present situation. Let's welcome on the show Gopal Srinivasan, CMD TVS Capital Funds and board member IVCA, Gagan Goyal, partner Indian Quotient, Rehan Yar Khan, managing partner Orios Ventures Partners, and Abhishek Agarwal, managing partner Rockstud Capital. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me right here on ET Now. I'll start with you, Mr. Srinivasan. What is the situation, on ground in terms of the harsh realities of the startup ecosystem?
No, I think the last 1 year has seen the clear separation of those who are strong and adaptable from those who are not, or those who are more fortunate to be in the right businesses and from those who are not. So today in India, you have both in the corporate sector as well as the emerging corporate sector, which you call the startup sector, as basically the same group of people who know how to overcome and manage crises. Surely some of them may be at a very edge because as they're just getting up, maybe pushed back, not all of them may come through. I would say India is so much stronger in the last 1 year in the midst of this weird crisis than ever before.
Let me take it to you, Rehan, in terms of giving me, a real picture of what's happening on ground. Last year versus this year, last year was bad enough. So what is the situation now?
Fortunately, what happens is that the startup boom, which has come to India so far, in a weird way, has escaped the bottom of the K because it has largely been in the internet sectors. It is very unfortunate for companies which are in the bottom part of the K, right? I mean, which is anybody connected to, let's say, movies and those kind of things, and even some of the payment companies have been affected, lending companies have been affected, right? Because see, while we are talking about the stock market booming and which is completely weird, right? That the stock market has been booming, a huge disconnect from ground reality. The reality is that a lot of people's incomes are down. So either people have taken pay cuts in their jobs, or there are a lot of people which have they're out of jobs, right? But I wanted to echo Gopal's point. We are a resilient country. Listen, we've been a poor country for a long time, right? Ever since independence. So we know how to handle the down. It's only recently actually India saw the ups, right? So we are very rooted in hardships in this country.
Let me take it to Gagan. And I want to shift focus for a bit from the startup ecosystem to just how VCs are thinking. For VCs as a community, we saw they're getting a lot more, going back to the fundamentals when they were actually investing. And we did see that actually dry up quite a bit. 2021 is obviously a lot darker than 2020. So, how are you looking at, as for speaking for the VC community, how are you looking at funding, if at all?
So Sonali, I think funding front, the private venture market is equally charged up like the stock market. I think everyone all the funds are flush with capital. So there's a lot of activity in the market, right from early stage investing to the late stage investing. I think you have noticed that this year we have already crossed more than 14 or 15 unicorns in just one quarter. So that's a sign that that. And actually all this, most of the venture capital investment, as Rehan mentioned, they are in the technology sector or internet sector. So interestingly, most of the company has got the tailwind because of this pandemic. So that has also enhanced the overall funding environment. So from venture capital side, as I said, it is quite positive across the spectrum.
I understand, but if you had to give me, let's say, numbers, let's say, and let's look at the base as 2019, because anyway, 2020 was not a great year either. But even if you look at the kind of funding that did take place in 2020 and you juxtapose it to 2021, how does it look?
Well, I would echo the sentiment, because the fact is that, it goes by numbers, right? As much as we are looking at the pessimism in terms of what is happening in the country from the overall health point of view, if we have to look at from the startup ecosystem, this year has been, I would say, one of the best if we have to compare the last two. So just to put a perspective, you asked a number, in 2019, almost close to $11 billion came to the country, right? And in 2020, that number was close to $10 billion. Now, according to me, my senses would be that this year would be crossing definitely both the years' number, right? And within this year, we have already seen this 14 number as a unicorn. That would be again one of the highest rise, ever coming. And if we have considered overall as the size of this country where we are, we are still a long way to go. So as much as we can inject the pessimism overall what is happening, but I'm still very bullish on the fact that the innovation is happening here. It is actually solving some real problems on the ground, and therefore the money is chasing the fundamentals here. Right? So it is no different there. I would be a person who would bank on numbers, and I think so. This bullishness should continue here. There was indeed, I would say, there was a pause for this while last year actually went only because of Corona, and people were trying to figure it out how to do this, how to deal with this pandemic with a new way of working. And I guess this year people were much prepared when the second wave came as far as how to handle the operation is concerned. I'm definitely, sorry of whatever is happening, of course, in the country as far as the second wave is concerned. But again, from the business point of view, I guess, the ones which know how to manage the crisis are definitely doing well and attracting capital.
Wanted to talk to you about, everybody on this panel has mentioned unicorns, right? And yes, it was a great year because we had, a double-digit unicorns from the Indian ecosystem, startup ecosystem. My fact is, for every unicorn, there are several failures. What are those people who have attempted and had to shut shop because of the situation? What's happening there? Could you give me some sense of what's happening there? Of course, the success stories are always talked about. We as media cover them, but we don't talk about people who have not made the cut, startups that have not made the cut, which is a lot more than the people who we talk about.
I think this is a field where basically we are Kshatriya Banyas. We are entering the business with a view, with the spirit of the Kshatriya and the mind of the Banya, in some sense, coming together. I'm not being parochial. I'm just using simple expressions to understand. And therefore, death around us in the battlefield, including us, is part of life. Death is life, life is death. I think that is the spirit which we should not worry too much. We should worry about the overall capital that went into the startups and whether the ultimate value creation in India at a portfolio level.
And Rehan, you're younger, so maybe you won't be as philosophical. Can you talk to me about the ecosystem, which is, and he made a good point that, for the money that has been infused and the value that is created, do you think we are looking attractive to the world? And can you justify that also from just an Indian standpoint?
What can't be denied, listen, India is going through a rough patch. The world has been through a rough patch. What cannot be denied is the fundamentals, of the economy, which this is a very large and resilient country, right? We are one of the great nations of the world. We are not a small island nation of a small population, which is very fragile. There are many institutions and there's infrastructure and there has been years of education and years of systems inside this country. And all those are coming together to consistently increase the market in this country. Right? So while, the valuation numbers do catch the headlines of the press, if you do actually look at the ROC numbers of these companies, right? And let's talk about the startup world. You will see revenues have been rising at a magnificent clip, right? I appreciate losses also rising, and the losses are rising because they've been doing market development and till I don't invest, I don't make this thing. But the top line has been rising magnificently.
The virus has completely ravaged the country. Unemployment is definitely going to be at its peak. We're going to see poverty like never before. Even the middle class, which was used to spending and wanted to spend, has become cautious because we don't know when we're going to lose our jobs. We don't know if we're going to have salary cuts. Some of us have already gotten salary cuts. We don't know. So this entire saving mindset which we had previously has obviously come back with a bang just because of the insecurity that surrounds all of us. Given that situation, looking at how just consumers, sentiment and psychology and just the way they're behaving, how is that the entire panel sees so much optimism in, the spending pattern of India? Don't you think India will now, for at least the next foreseeable future, go back in time, start saving, start protection? We were, of course, starting to spend and living life and getting there. But I think somewhere, don't you think there will be a contra behavior that we'll see?
Sonali, I have a different view here that what we have seen, at least in last 1 year, because of this pandemic and lockdowns and all, in overall people had less avenues to spend money. And because of that, when in the October, when the market opened up, we saw most of our companies, be it consumer brands, selling a cosmetic or a shoe, or maybe you take any other company, like any company which you saw. In fact, B2B companies doing trading and all. I think everywhere we saw a good spike coming up in terms of demand, and companies crossed their last March peak number, up to 80 to 90% to maybe 130 to 40%. So I think there was a big jump which we saw. So across the spectrum, we are seeing a lot of action happening.
India is still a very, very large unorganized market, right? And therefore, in each segment, there is a huge scope for somebody to come in and grab some share of the organized market. Rehan actually took a name of each of his portfolio company, and there are several names. If you go, the reason why these companies are doing that kind of transaction is only because of taking away the market share from those unorganized names, right? If one has to say that, people like you and me and other severals who still need, basic grocery to have every day, those medicines for our, beloved ones, we are still buying that. There is no cut down there. But from where are we buying? Right, that is a big question. Today, you and me are not allowed to go outside on the street and stand on a queue and again look for it. Today, that option is available to you through an app, and you can get everything whatever possible you want to enable yourself. So those things are important to consider, and that's where the organized play is coming into picture.
I'm only asking you to forecast realistically what's going to happen, let's say, in the next 5 to 7 years, because of the setback the country has faced, and to not record the kind of impact this is going to have across socio-economic sectors. Of course, the elite will be elite. I'm not discussing them, but and for us to think that we are only being serviced by the e-com players of the world, and people are not going to shops right now and buying, I think is being a bit idealistic. Going forward, do you see somewhat a change in the way we consume things? And because of that, do you see a change in broadly the business ecosystem and hence the startup ecosystem?
India has never seen so much pain and never seen so much fear. There is fear today. So that fear and pain is throughout the society. Economically, maybe the bottom is not so badly affected. They are on the daily meat, they get their food from the government, they have to farming. So they're not economic. I'm talking about economics. They're not living a great life. So let us start with the basis. They're living a very hand-to-mouth life. So the hand-to-mouth life continues. And that's where the government takes care of that entire group in a very big way. The top, let's not talk about them. The middle is devastated. These are the ones with the job cuts and no bonus and layoffs and so on and so forth. And there is no shortcut to this. You'll have to go through 2-3 years of pain to rebuild it. But I'm just hoping that the kind of people that we have in this country, That's entrepreneurs, right? I stay with that word entrepreneurs because that's what they really are. I mean, founder is self-aggrandizement. So fundamentally, those entrepreneurs will actually, in my mind, turn this tragic times into opportunities for the better. Behavior is always tends like a trampoline to come back, but it will come back after suffering. There's no doubt about the suffering we're going to have. I mean, it is awful in terms of we could never have imagined the suffering. And now the principal scientific advisor has talked about a third wave, whether it was more as an announcement to prepare us to be more strong and be more careful about double masking and so forth, or was it real? I don't know. But there is going to be severe pain, and the middle is going to be hammered, as it all. The middle always suffers, Sonali. The poor will be looked after by the government. The rich will somehow manage. The middle will suffer, and I don't think we should. I mean, we can spend more time on it, but of no avail. But I feel entrepreneurs will actually find solutions to help people in healthcare in all these areas, and there could be a new set of startups, maybe 10-20%, where the Rehans, the Gagans, and the Abhisheks will fund, which will actually find solutions. And I think we should have the hope that through these difficult times, they will be the ones who will be freedom fighters.
Rehan, give me a sense as to what entrepreneurs, you're mentoring or are in touch with, and that entire ecosystem are feeling right now in terms of the challenges that they're going through.
So Sonali, this started with lockdown 1, right? So when lockdown 1 came, there was a lot of question marks over revenue, right? And then all companies. So we did a lot of work with our companies on sustenance, how to survive lockdown, and we actually had a thesis, and I published that thesis on LinkedIn. We said in April 2020, we had said that this is a 24-month issue, right? Because our thesis was that if lockdown is holding down the virus, then the minute you unlock, the virus will be back, and it's some time away before we can get a lot of people vaccinated. And in those days, they were talking about the vaccine rollout happened actually a couple of quarters before it was originally supposed to. So there has been a lot of work which has gone into sustenance of that. Listen, I think VCs and PEs have a more comfortable existence. We run small teams, we get paid in advance. So I think the people on this panel haven't felt as much pain as a lot of other companies have. And number 2, we've ended up investing in companies which have done well, whereas other companies haven't, right? So what you may be getting from this panel is not a complete representation of what is out there. But, as Gopal and Gagan and Abhishek and all have said, is that India is a resilient country. We will get by and get through this. I think our companies have learned, right? So one thing about these founders is that they're very good at learning and pivoting and constantly adjusting their model.
If startup founders or entrepreneurs, as you call them, had to ask you, give us a few, lifeboat tips right now when things are looking dark and they seem like they're sinking. So give us some lifeboat tips. What would they be?
It's a very tough question.
I know.
It's a very tough question. If I had to say something, I would basically tell them to do 2 things. One is that fundamentally, we should never forget that this is the Swadharma we have chosen. And therefore, we must stay on the path, right? We must stay on the path with a kind of courage and resilience and do whatever it takes. This is going to be the story we tell our grandchildren about how we survived a world war. And we should not give up. Second thing I would tell them is, while being fearless, while being resilient, do not suspend the use of your commercial intellect. So make clever judgments commercially, which is where the Kshatriya meets the Banya. Make the clever judgments, use, as Rehan said, this is the time for B2C to become B2B, because as one of my colleagues said, India is getting completely informal sector, getting organized. What does that mean? The B2B and the B2B2C become huge. So combine that duality of the cleverness of making pivots and changes and model changes, etc., along with that fearlessness to continue the battle. Because at the end of it, the only thing that can really go wrong after all that is you fail. And no investor is going to grudge you that. I mean, some will, but on an overall basis. Because they're going to say, boss, तूने try किया यार, तूने अच्छा किया, क्या करें, ये तो होता ही रहता है. and this is a different period. I think that I would leave them as only two things, because that's all I've done in my life. I've been through two major crises. I lost a business in one crisis and nearly lost a business. But then when I somehow survived, I sold it for 8 times my investment. And this was when I was an entrepreneur and not an investor. So I think these are the only two things we can do, and have faith that India depends on you. India depends on all the 1.3 billion Indians all the time. So we must also never forget that, because that is a higher cause and a higher calling, which is beyond us.
Undoubtedly, I think the startup ecosystem has really performed phenomenally during this crisis. So really, kudos to the sector. But, just to ask you a question, actually to ask this panel a question before I close, I understand what you're saying, that, battle on and strive at it and don't give up. And I get that. But, there is a famous song called The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. And the lines say that, you got to know when you hold them and know when to fold them. Do you think this is probably a good lesson too for startups who have started on their journey but are finding hiccups? So, instead of striving on, do you think they must have a sense of when to hold and when to fold? Just asking.
I was on the same point which you were saying. I was entrepreneur for 10 years, and then I became VC from last 3 years. My personal learning, what I've seen about Indian market and opportunities here, I think in India particularly, I can say, because of the cost of living being so low and cost of doing business, you don't need so much of cost as compared to, say, Silicon Valley and other market. I think if you can sustain, if you can live life longer, I've seen a lot of my batchmates from IIT, they were about to quit, but they just continued. And in 3-4 years, things changed completely and they managed to figure out a right model. And also, I think in India, luckily, because of the cost of living being so low, there's a good chance that in 8-9 years, 10 years you give to your company, you can make a reasonable return out of your time. So I think go home, which is a valley concept, doesn't work in India, in my view. Yeah, for us, we need to retain in a certain point of time. So we look for the opportunities which can make tons of money in maybe 8-10 years. But for an entrepreneur, I will say, you just be at it. You show the persistence. It may take, may not 5-7 years, maybe 15 years, but in India, you can make a real value of your time. I'm pretty sure. And I personally witnessed many such stories in my life where not quitting is actually a solution. Don't quit.
Abhishek?
Dream, determination, and belief. If that is all is there, and still if you believe in your idea, then you should continue. Otherwise, there's no harm in unfolding. I would be having a little contra view here. I would definitely agree that once you take investors' money, there is a fiduciary responsibility. But more than that, it boils down to, as an entrepreneur, that how long can he continue to his journey if all these three together is not making a sense. So, as long as you unfold and return the money, I think that is very important. But whether you are successful or you're going to become successful, I think all is related to the belief on the idea which the guy has actually went to the path. At this point of time, my advice would be, don't be adventurous. You can be opportunistic, but don't need to be adventurous. One can wait, let the pandemic little bit get over, and probably you can shape your business. But then, nothing to get bogged down and shut down. Only if you have lost that belief, or probably all the other circumstances can be, again, due to the pandemic, one can take that call. But again, I would definitely agree to one point, that in this country, the time value money would make sense for you if you stay longer. And if you believe on these three combinations, that is always very difficult when you consider times like this. So yeah.
Sure. Rehan?
In a game of cards, there's no concept of pivot. So don't fold them, but pivot is what I say.
I think this panel, I think after this conversation, I've realized that there's been a lot of amazing inspirational stories of your personal journeys where you've probably failed, but then, come back from the ashes, and that should be a separate conversation, because as it is, quite an inspiration during these times, especially during these tough and trying times. Having said that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your candid views. Thank you for your philosophy, Mr. Srinivasan, and hoping all of you stay safe, you and your families, and hoping India gets through these very dark and trying times. Thank you again for your time.